Hi everyone, my name is Alex and I'm here to talk to you about the Arbsession HarDiSLING. The Arbsession HarDiSLING has many different uses when you're in the tree. Whether you wish to climb double rope or single rope, I guarantee that you will find yourself using the HarDiSLING while you're climbing in the tree. I'm going to show you some uses for the HarDiSLING if you are choosing to climb stationary rope technique. One of my favorite redirects when climbing SRT with the HarDiSLING is what I call a cannon-based redirect. That means I take the large stone eye, pass it around the tree, and feed the ring through the large stone eye on a larger section of the tree. I try to get this right underneath the union so that I know that it's not going to move on me, and then I will take the rest of the sling and I'll wrap upwards. I'm trying to do this to create a little bit of compression in the tree, and now I can take a bite of my climbing line and I can spike this through with either a regular carabiner or a revolver rig, and then by capturing the tail of my climbing line, I now have a 3-to-1 equalizing redirect while climbing in the tree. Another one of the many uses for the HarDiSLING when climbing stationary rope technique is creating a thimble prusik. And you can do that by taking the large stone eye and passing it through the aluminum ring, and I'll actually girth hitch the large stone eye onto the aluminum ring. This creates a looped prusik, which allows me to then prusik on to my climbing line. Here I've got a 6-coiled prusik, and then I will spike the ring with another carabiner. This allows me to create a quick mechanical advantage with my tail, or I'll actually take the prusik like this, pass it around a union, and clamp itself to make another really quick redirect. You can create another prusik style redirect by taking the large stone eye of the HarDiSLING and tying an English prusik onto your climbing line. This would be great if your line is under tension and let's say you cannot come off of system, or you want to keep that load. Let's say you're on a really tiny branch. You can keep that load on your primary tie-in. So I will tie the English prusik onto my climbing line, and then I will take this and I will pass it around, and you can either clip a carabiner onto the ring and clip it onto your climbing line, or you can take a bite of your HarDiSLING, pass it through the ring, and spike that with the carabiner. This creates a little bit of an interesting, somewhat adjustable redirect when climbing in a tree. That's English prusik. What's great about this is you can actually unload your main tie-in, simply load the English prusik, and then tie an alpine butterfly. You can use the alpine butterfly as a stopper knot for the English prusik, and this creates a somewhat secondary tie-in. Continuing on the idea of English prusik style redirects with the HarDiSLING, this is one I'll use that's remotely triggerable but not retrievable. So I will use the large stone eye of the HarDiSLING to prusik onto my climbing line, and then I will take the ring, pass it through a suitable union, and I will take a bite of my climbing line above my primary tie-in or my life support system and pass it through the ring, and then I will actually clip that with a revolver rig or another carabiner, and I will clip that to either my hitch climber pulley or to my bridge ring, and then when I am done with this redirect, I can undo the carabiner or revolver rig and just simply pull above my climbing system, and that redirect will release. Now you will still have to go up and retrieve the HarDiSLING with the English style, with the English prusik, simply because that's not going to fall down. This is a section of the video where I'm going to honor Kevin Bingham. What I have here is something I'm calling the Blake's revolver. So I have a Blake's hitch tied with the HarDiSLING. I'm using the large sewn eye end of the HarDiSLING as a stopper knot, running to a midline clove, and the midline clove has a carabiner on it to attach to your bridge ring. And then on the top side of the midline clove, I have the ring side of the HarDiSLING with a bite of my climbing line running through, and that is spiked with a DMM revolver, one of the original ones, which captures nicely on this 32mm Arbsession ring. This allows for supplemental friction, which of course, this is all a play on the Fate revolver. Thank you, Kevin, for everything you've done. Now I'm going to show you some uses for the HarDiSLING if you're going to be climbing moving rope system. One of my favorite ways to use the HarDiSLING is actually really simple. What I will do is I'll take the large sewn eye, pass it through my bridge ring, and then I can either create a girth hitch onto the carabiner, or I can just put it straight into the sewn eye. And I will take the HarDiSLING, pass it through the ring on the HarDiSLING, and spike it. And what that creates is a really easy bridge extension for moving rope. So when I'm ascending, I don't necessarily need to tin my slack. I can actually pull below my climbing system and it will tin my slack for me. This is similar to the O-rig, just a little bit easier. And of course, it's adjustable. So if you wanted a little more slack, you could give yourself a little bit more, or you can take it in. And you can also just take the ring on the HarDiSLING and pass it onto the carabiner on your main climbing system to make it a little bit shorter. If it just so happens to be December, or maybe you left your ascenders at home, you can take the large sewn eye of the HarDiSLING and tie a Klim heist or a English prusik and use the HarDiSLING as a fully rated footlock prusik up into the tree. By adding a ring onto the large sewn eye of the HarDiSLING, you can create a really super simple retrievable friction saver. All you'll need is a 1-inch retrieval ball, and that will catch on the 32mm ring and pull that through. You can also feed the whole HarDiSLING through the large ring and girth hitch onto the 32mm ring, creating a shorter, probably a little bit more useful friction saver. This would be great for secondary tie-in, or if you want to use your tail as a Blake's hitch and you don't want to wear out that bark. And then again, a 1-inch retrieval ball will catch on the Arbsession 32mm ring and retrieve that up nicely in the tree, and that will keep the large 40mm ring captured onto the HarDiSLING at the same time. By taking a large ring and passing the large sewn eye of the HarDiSLING through the large ring, and then capturing the large sewn eye with another carabiner or a revolver rig, you can create a really nice equalizing main tie-in between two small points. This will create a lot of compression in the tree. This is similar to the equalizer or a multi-anchor. And then again, 1-inch retrieval ball will pass through the revolver rig, through the large ring, and then retrieve. Of course, you are pulling a lot of hardware through there, so be mindful of any potential snags while climbing. You can create an adjustable friction saver with the HarDiSLING if you have a retrieval thimble. Here I have a thimble that will accept the red DMM retrieval cones, and you can prusik on to the HarDiSLING. Because the HarDiSLING is a little bit thinner, I might go with 8 wraps or 6 wraps, really whatever you're comfortable with. Just make sure that it grabs and holds and you feel comfortable with it. And again, practice this slow and slow. But now you have a fully adjustable friction saver that you can retrieve with one of the little red DMM retrieval cones. So the HarDiSLING can also be used as a split tail for tying a taut line hitch or a Blake's hitch. But what's great is you do not need an extra carabiner unless you want to your bridge ring. You can simply take the large sewn eye, pass it through your bridge ring, and then take the other end of the HarDiSLING and pass it through, and that will girth hitch onto your ring just like a regular split tail. Now that I have my Blake's hitch tied, one of the cool things about the HarDiSLING is because you have the large sewn eye on one end, what you can do is you can create a self-tending Blake's hitch. And you can do this by taking a bite on the terminal end of your rope and feeding it through the HarDiSLING. I would feed this in a way that you still have some slack in the HarDiSLING between the ring and the Blake's hitch. And then you will take a carabiner and actually spike that bite. And what's cool about that is you can still descend, but when you pull on the non-end, it actually tends for you. Because of the large sewn eye on the HarDiSLING, it will actually accommodate most boot sizes. What's awesome about that is you can pass the large sewn eye through the ring on the HarDiSLING and give yourself a really nice foot loop if you don't have a sling, or let's say you don't have a place to clip in a carabiner. You can actually just pass your whole boot through the HarDiSLING and give yourself some really solid footing. Let's say you're working on some really slippery branches or something. There's nothing worse than slipping and sliding around, but then you can take the HarDiSLING and you can actually work it up with you and cinch it down just by applying your body weight. Let's say you want to get out on a really small branch and the foot loop's just going to be too far away from it. If you happen to have a foot ascender on, you can pass the HarDiSLING through the foot ascender to get even closer or closer or closer to the branch that you're working on. The HarDiSLING also makes a fantastic lanyard for other objects while up in the tree. Let's say you have a really small branch and there's a greenhouse or something right below you. You can pass the HarDiSLING around that girth hitch onto that piece, secure it onto your saddle. You can take your handsaw or your chainsaw, safely make that cut. It will catch onto your saddle in some regard, and then you can remove the girth hitch off the end of the piece, toss it, lower it, whatever you want. HarDiSLING also makes a great lanyard for tools while cabling. You can take the ring, pass it through the large sewn eye, and girth hitch onto the handle of most drills, and then you can use that ring to stow it onto your saddle. This keeps everything nice and tethered. You're not going to drop anything on your ground guy. And because of the large sewn eye, you got a little bit of extra space past that girth hitch, so you can actually stow that really nicely on any kind of tool carrier that you have on your saddle. Thank you all for tuning in. You can get yours today at arbsession.com. This has been the HarDiSLING. One sling to rule them all.